Welcome back to the NWR Virtual Healthcare Conference. The next presentation today is from one of our private companies, ImmVirX, and we're joined by the CEO, Dr. Malcolm McColl. ImmVirX is developing novel oncolytic immunotherapies to create powerful new cancer therapy combinations. Its lead asset, IVX037, is in clinical studies, while the second asset, IVX055, is in preclinical development. Once again, a reminder, if you have a question, please feel free to type it in using the Q&A panel within Zoom. But for now, I will hand it over to Malcolm.
Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate the invitation to present today and the opportunity to provide an update on our progress at ImmVirX with our receptor-targeted oncolytic RNA immunotherapies. Next slide, please. This is just our disclaimer, which you can take a look at on the website at your leisure. Next slide, please. So we are a first-in-class clinical stage oncolytic immunotherapy company targeting the most common cancer types globally. We have our lead drug candidate, IVX037, actually now moved into phase 1b clinical studies in solid cancers, being colorectal, ovarian, and gastric cancer. It's in phase 1b in combination with a PD-1 inhibitor from our collaboration partners, Innovent Biologics, a really highly regarded Chinese big biopharma company. There's been a lot of recent investor and industry interest in oncolytic virus immunotherapies. CG Oncology is one of the few NASDAQ IPOs from the class of 2024 that's above water, had a really strong performance actually post-IPO, market cap now around about that $2 billion mark, and Replimune really progressing their oncolytic virus in melanoma patients quite nicely actually, in a market cap around about that 800 and something million for those guys. And I should point out also that a lot of the lead US specialist investors have taken a position in both of these companies, as they did in our former company, Viralytics. So there's definitely strong US investor interest in oncolytic viruses. We have a pipeline of oncolytic RNA candidates. Our first candidate, our first lead asset, excuse me, 037 is in the clinic in phase 1b. Excuse me. Our second asset, 055, we're targeting to enter the clinic in late 2025 in lung cancer. We have a really highly experienced management team with a proven track record, obviously through the Viralytics Cavitac experience, where we took that through to acquisition by Merck in mid-2018. And we're really funded with a strong cash position through to third quarter of 2026, with strong institutional investors and VCs on our register, including Acorn and One Ventures. Next slide, please. So we really face here a situation where there's a lot of cancer patients in our target indications. The forecast deaths per annum, you can see there on the screen in the second and third column, quite staggering in terms of tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of patient deaths per annum across colorectal, ovarian, gastric. Our first indications for 037, liver cancer. Our next indications for IVX037, and then of course lung cancer, our first target for IVX055. So big, the most important cancer types globally, as I said. And then if you look at the fourth column there, you can see that the response to the checkpoint inhibitors, drugs like the market-leading Keytruda, are in fact only in that sort of single-digit or sort of mid to high teens type range. So a really, quite a low response rate to those, immunotherapies. We think, and we proved this with Viralytics Cavitac, that an oncolytic virus, when added to a checkpoint, can really elevate the response rates that you can see to these checkpoints. And we're certainly optimistic about achieving the same outcomes in these cancers that we're targeting now. And the important point here, I think, also is that we all know that Big Pharma's facing loss of exclusivity on some of their biggest cancer drugs or drugs in other parts of their portfolio, including Keytruda for Merck. So they are going to lose hundreds of billions of dollars in annual sales. So right at the moment, they're certainly looking for drugs to fill pipelines and revenues through the next sort of 5 to 10 years. We think our agent, as I'll talk a bit more in a minute, has a great potential to help fill some of that gap. Next slide, please. Just a bit of a spotlight on colorectal cancer. It is the second leading cause of cancer-related deaths worldwide. Sadly, once you get to the later stage, and the disease has spread beyond the bowel, the 5 years overall survival rate for these patients with colorectal cancer is only around about 15%. So you can see an urgent need for better outcomes for patients in that setting. And really worryingly, we're seeing an increasing incidence in younger people. And colorectal cancer is now the leading cause of cancer death in men under 50 and the number 2 cause of cancer death in women under 50. So this is really worrying, and again, a reason why we need much better therapies to be active in that setting. Next slide, please. This is the team which will be familiar to most of this audience if they've followed the Viralytics and now the ImmVirX story. Darren Sheffrin was our CSO at Viralytics, now CSO and inventor of the technology here at ImmVirX, my co-founder. Jeannie Jochen joined the board when One Ventures led the Series B, obviously with massive big pharma experience, and really added a lot of value to the company since she came on board not that long ago. Leonard Post from the US has been associated with the 3 most successful oncolytic virus companies, actually. So again, just proving his worth as we progress through the clinical development of the program. Rob Routley, CEO of Acorn, joined following their participation and lead of the Series A1 financing. And Robert's had a lot of success guiding young companies through to bigger and brighter outcomes, and obviously brings a lot of capital market experience as well, which is very valuable for us. And finally, Rob Vickery, who was part of the Viralytics team, just also pointing out that he was the CFO at Clarity when they did their successful IPO in 2021. So very experienced team with this track record of taking an agent through to the Merck acquisition in mid-2018, as I said. Next slide, please. And this is really the operational team, a really tremendous team, actually, with experience across preclinical, manufacturing, quality, clinical development. All the team members here, apart from Oksana on the far right, were part of the Viralytics team, then spent 12 to 18 months with Merck, really just sort of honing their skills. I think the reason we've been able to move so quickly from a whiteboard idea only a few short years ago now into the clinic and through phase 1A into phase 1B is very much down to the excellence of this team. Oksana joined us from St Vincent's Hospital, where she led the phase 1 unit, a very big phase 1 site. She had a direct experience on the ImmVirX study, so been a great addition to the team as we build our clinical strengths and roll out the program across more sites through Australia. Next slide, please. ImmVirX, our partner for the phase 1B study. This is a very substantive Chinese biopharma company. Sintilimab is their PD-1 inhibitor, which has the #1 position in terms of PD-1 inhibitors in China. This is a very accomplished company with an excellent oncology pipeline and portfolio. They don't have an oncolytic virus, however. They're very interested in oncolytic viruses, so we're delighted to work with these guys and see where it takes us along this journey. But having their collaboration and providing us with free Sintilimab certainly saves the company multi-millions of dollars through the phase 1B study. Next slide, please. So this just shows the sort of the mechanism of action of this oncolytic virus. You can see on the far left there that healthy cells, normal cells, are really able to defend themselves against the oncolytic virus pretty readily. They knock it out quite quickly, so there's really no deleterious effects there. And malignant cells, however, cancer cells, are highly susceptible to viral infection, so the virus gets in, it multiplies very quickly, kills the cancer cell, then spreads to other cancer cells in the vicinity. And then on the right-hand side, the chart there just shows that the virus, during this process of killing the cancer cells, breaks down the cancer cells, releases fragments of those cells that then become visible to the immune system. So you start to get an immune response against the cancer as well as the direct cancer killing activity of the virus. So it's a really effective 1-2 punch against cancer. And this is what we have seen with Viralytics, Cavatac, and are now starting to see with ImmVirX, IVX-037. Next slide, please. So this is our pipeline. You can see for 037, we've moved through obviously discovery, preclinical phase 1A, and now into phase 1B in combination with Tyvyt, which is the brand name for Innovent's sintilimab. So just underway with some early patient data starting to come through in phase 1b in colorectal, ovarian, and gastric. We've completed preclinical studies looking at the activity of 037 in liver cancer or hepatocellular carcinoma, and we aim to include that liver cancer patients into the phase 1b study as we move through the rest of the first half of 2025. We're also taking a look at the combination of 037 with CAR T cell therapy and doing some preclinical work now. And there's a lot of interest in combining an oncolytic virus with CAR Ts to drive them into the cancer cell and sort of have that additive effect from the two agents. So we're excited to see how that preclinical data emerges again through the first half of 2025. And then our second asset is IMVX-055, targeting late-stage non-small cell lung cancer, moving through preclinical development at the moment, aiming to start phase 1a studies later this year or early next year. Next slide, please. Our lead candidate, IMVX-037. Let's take a look at some of the results there. So you can see we've moved through the phase 1a. This is sort of a step-by-step process. Those that have followed the story will know this quite well. You begin just with a single injection of only 4 ml. Then you move to the next cohorts where you get 2 injections. And then we moved, because it was so well tolerated, we moved up to a series of up to 7 injections in patients and moved the dose volume up to 10 ml. And then we moved through expansion cohorts as well. So pretty quick progress actually through phase 1a. And we're now underway with first patients coming through in phase 1b. And I think that will recruit pretty quickly actually as we add more sites. There's a lot of interest from clinicians. So we had 4 sites in phase 1a. We're now at 7 sites for phase 1b. And I think, in fact, we'll shortly move up to 8 sites in Australia for the phase 1b. So a lot of interest driving what we expect will be enhanced recruitment as we move through phase 1b. Next slide, please. So we've seen some pretty promising outcomes. This is in the phase 1a or monotherapy study where we just look at 037 alone. And keep in mind, this is in the context of late-stage patients that have failed all available therapies and where the standard of care in this setting offers a response rate of less than 2%. So what we've seen here is a couple of pretty interesting case studies. The first patient there you can see with the orange bar is a lady where we've seen a reduction in the injected lesions heading down towards a response. We'll talk a bit more about her in a moment. And then in the yellow bar, you can see there a patient that's gone on to have a really sort of prolonged activity heading towards, in fact, achieving a response as we move forward. And this patient now has been on the study for over a year, in fact. And the oncologist in this case really considers this quite an exceptional response with no new metastatic disease or no new disease emerging for over a year. And this is a patient that has not had over that period any additional cancer treatment. So the patient was only on IMVX-037. So really quite remarkable outcome. I think the next slide just shows a little bit more detail on that exceptional responder. As I said, he joined the study in mid-2023 as part of our cohort 1 in our monotherapy. He had 2 injectable lesions, initially given 2 ml in each of those lesions. And so what we saw on imaging, ongoing imaging of the patient was very stable disease with a corresponding decrease in one of the biomarkers called CEA, which is a sort of gives you a guide as to whether there's disease in other parts of the body. So it was really quite promising to see that. As I said, the patient has not required further treatment for 20 months since the trial initiation and 14 months since completing the trial treatment. And the oncologist believes that this is really indicative of a systemic response with abscopal effect. So no new lesions emerging over that time is really quite remarkable. So a great outcome for the patient. I think the next slide just shows a little more detail on this exceptional responder. We took biopsies of the patient's 2 injected lesions in April 2024, and then we reported on those at a meeting with shareholders and interested parties late last year. The clinician spoke here about seeing in one of those injected lesions just a few scant cancer cells, small volume of residual disease. And in the other lesion, there was a complete absence of tumour cells, really reflecting what they call a complete pathological response. And then when a PET scan was conducted where you can look for cancer around the body, there was no signs of any of cancer spreading anywhere else. So a great outcome for the patient. I think the oncologist on that day spoke about it being life-changing. If you think about someone that's been through many prior therapies with all the adverse events associated with that, to come onto this study and then have a very long-term outcome like this without adverse effects of any note is really a tremendous outcome. So delighted for this in this scenario. The next slide just shows the second case study. Again, this was a lady with cecal carcinoma. There was one injected lesion that received 2 doses. This particular lady was tracking the lesion size was reducing and tracking towards a response, which was again really encouraging. But unfortunately, she had a flare of an underlying rheumatoid arthritis, which required steroid treatment. So she had to go off the study. But nonetheless, it was a pretty encouraging start for the monotherapy program. Next slide, please. In terms of the intratumoral administration, we've had a lot of interaction, obviously, with the interventional radiologists. These are the folks who inject IVX-037 into lesions. They're very experienced at injecting cancerous lesions and also taking biopsies from cancerous lesions right really throughout the body. It's done either through ultrasound or CT guidance. We've done it with IVX-037 on multiple occasions, dosed liver, mets, lymph nodes, lung mets, etc. And it's been done very safely, very readily. It's a very simple procedure. The patient is given local anaesthetic, sometimes with some conscious sedation as well. So just something just to reduce any anxiety, not in all cases. And then it's a 20-minute procedure, or less really than 20-minute procedure, with then some monitoring for an hour or two after it before the patient goes home. And this has been really quite readily conducted by the interventional radiologist and readily handled by the patient as well. When you consider the sort of adverse events you see with other agents, this is actually quite smooth sailing. Next slide, please. Sort of looking at the current landscape in colorectal cancer. I mean, this is really terrible situation to report, actually, if you look at the existing standard of care with the response rates less than 2%. And then if you look at the far right-hand column there, adverse event profile sort of between 50 and 70% of grade 3 or higher. And these are the adverse events that really cause, can cause quite serious or even life-threatening outcomes in the patient. So not a very high response rate and lots of adverse events. Merck ran a big study with their LAG-3 in combination with Keytruda or pembrolizumab, and in their phase 2 study saw a 6% response rate. And that was enough to justify going into a very expensive and much larger phase 3 study, which ultimately failed. But I think that just gives you a guidance in terms of the sort of the hurdle that you have to jump to be meaningful in this sort of setting. It can be sort of in that sort of high single digits response rate justifies moving forward into much bigger studies. So that gives us a lot of encouragement, particularly given the results we've seen to date just with monotherapy. The next slide, I think, just takes a look at the adverse event profile. And what we found across the phase 1A study is that IVX-037 has been really well tolerated with a favourable safety profile. There have been no dose-limiting toxicities. We've seen just a handful of grade 2, which are just moderate AEs, don't persist very long. And then a few more of the grade 1s, which are mild and can be really treated just with off-the-shelf type therapy. So compare this to what you saw on the earlier slides, where you have a lot of grade 3 and higher with traditional therapies. You can see this is a really safe and well-tolerated option as far as the patient's concerned. And that's just so important in terms of them handling their cancer therapies. The next slide just really looks at a sort of path forward. So as I said, we're in phase 1B for colorectal, ovarian and gastric. It's kind of interesting to see here that in fact you can expand those from initial 15 patients across those settings to say 45 patients in our preferred indications. And then again, with good signals in that sort of setting, it's possible then to move into studies that have a registration intent, either a much larger expanded single-arm study or a randomized controlled trial for approval of the agent. So in the overall scheme of what Big Pharma look at, this would be a pretty sort of straightforward pathway through to registration approval, and one that they would understand and be able to conduct pretty readily. So we're just going to keep pushing forward, obviously, through phase 1B and see where it takes us. But from Big Pharma's point of view, this is not an onerous task to take it through to regulatory approval with the right outcomes, obviously. The next slide is just going to take a look at IVX 055, our second asset. And this is really targeting late-stage lung cancer where the patients have liver mets. Lung cancer, of course, is the #1 cause of cancer death globally. About 20% of patients have a disease that has spread to the liver. As you can see in the middle chart there, patients that have liver metastases, or where the disease is spread to the liver, have a much lower response rate to the immunotherapies like Keytruda. So the liver has an impact around the whole body, knocking down the immune system quite effectively, actually, which means liver mets have a very serious consequence for the patient. You can see on the far right graph that this looks at overall survival. Patients with liver metastases in the red have a much shorter survival compared to patients with lung cancer with metastases in other parts of the body. So an agent like 055 that will be injecting into liver mets, as well as any other available metastases in the body, combined with the checkpoint inhibitor, we think could really provide a great option where there's an area of such high unmet need, patients with liver metastases. Next slide, please. This is just one of the xenografts we conducted. So this is a study conducted in mice where we have non-small cell lung cancer cells that are injected in the flank of the mouse. We then let those tumours develop, and then we start to treat either with IVX-055, or the red lines there are the control, or just the buffer without the virus. And you can see that the tumour size increases really dramatically and very quickly in the control mice, but it's very much suppressed with the mice treated with IVX-055. We've done other work, in vitro work, where we know this IVX-055 is very active in non-small cell lung cancer, even at quite low viral challenge levels. Next slide, please. So just taking us to the overall summary. Look, I think we have a great opportunity here in terms of the pipeline that we're developing. Have an opportunity really for transformational care of these patients in the most common cancers globally. We've seen some really nice early signals, particularly in the colorectal cancer patients, and there's a relatively short pathway to take us through to studies of the regulatory intent. As I said, we've seen that in phase 1A, IVX-037 has been very well tolerated with some promising early signals. We're now underway with phase 1B in combination with ImmVirX checkpoint. So a lot's going to emerge over the coming months. Manufacture's been also, really smooth sailing for the team in conjunction with our US contract manufacturer. And we're looking forward to getting underway with IVX-055 in late-stage lung cancer. So looking at 2025, pretty catalyst rich, lots of readouts, and then further expansion of the phase 1B study over the next sort of 6 to 9 months. We'll be adding liver cancer patients to the phase 1B study. The big oncology conference, American Association of Cancer Research, is happening late in April. More news on that from us shortly, but we have been selected for posters in both the preclinical and clinical setting there for IVX-037. As far as 055 is concerned, we'll initiate our phase 1A study in lung cancer later this year, early next year. We also have a ACR preclinical presentation on 055. CAR-T, let's see how that unfolds. I mean, we've underway now with our in vivo work in mice with a combination of 037 and CAR-T, an exciting area. So looking forward to see how we move forward in that space. And I know there'll be interest from CAR-T companies around the world looking at ways to drive their CAR-T cell therapies into solid cancers. Strong cash position as the team remains, really focused and on, very frugal and cost effective and efficient. moving the program forward. So 24.4 million in cash at the end of February 2025, and well funded through to third quarter 2026. So look, it's exciting times. As I said earlier, Big Pharma really does need products targeting major cancer types to help fill what's going to be massive holes in their revenue. We think we really sort of fit the bill as far as that's concerned with our portfolio of products. So let's see how things unfold in phase 1B as we move forward through that program. Obviously, the audience understands that the ImmVirX team really understands how to negotiate and navigate that pathway through to a successful transaction with Big Pharma. So we'll just see how the data unfolds and where that takes us to. And look, really to conclude, I just want to, again, thank our team for all of the sort of great work to get us to this point. The most efficient team, to achieve what we've done with the revenue, with the financings we've done is really exceptional. I want to obviously thank shareholders for supporting us along the journey to this stage. Again, we've been very frugal with your financings. And of course, obviously to the oncologists that are involved in the studies, thank you to them and to the patients and their families involved in the studies. We're very grateful for their participation in the studies and giving us the opportunity to develop what we think could be potentially transformational therapy for late-stage cancer patients. So with that, Matt, I think I'll draw it to a close and just open up if there's any questions.
No problem. Thanks, Malcolm. I'll jump into a few questions in the few minutes we have left.
Yeah.
First one is just what's the plan from here with regards to, is the company going to remain private, or have you had any consideration around an IPO?
Yeah, look, I think obviously the IPO is always very much front and center of our mind. I think as we're all aware, it's been a pretty tough capital markets out there. If you look at the sort of whatever it was, something like 20 IPOs on NASDAQ last year, I think maybe 3 or 4 of those are still above water. So it's been very tough in the US. There haven't been many IPOs in Australia as well. So look, I think markets will eventually open up again. So what we're trying to do is just generate the data so we have a really compelling case for investors both here and in the US and other parts of the world. And so that's really the focus for the team. Also, obviously being very cautious with cash to enable us to be in a strong sort of financial position.
Very good. The next question is, are you looking to add further programs, or are you happy just concentrating on the existing assets?
Well, I think there's sort of the existing assets have so many opportunities, right? As we've said with 037 to add liver cancer into that program. Also, as we add CAR T cell therapy combinations into 037, 055 could also move down that sort of path as well. Other checkpoint inhibitors. Look, there's lots of optionality here with 037 and 055. We think there's, great opportunity there. And I suppose if other opportunities arise, then we'll take a look at them. But we're pretty comfortable with the portfolio as it sits today.
Very good. And then from your experience at Biolytics previously, is there any particular things that you learned from your time there that you've done differently this time around?
Oh, I just think it's a matter of just building that data. I think at the end of the day, it's a matter of going to these conferences and sort of presenting the clinical data. So have we sort of learned more from that? I guess just keep generating the right sort of data and presenting it to at conferences, and then meeting obviously with Big Pharma. In terms of the manufacturer, I think the team, has always been really strong there. We probably recognised that we needed to try to move the agent to a higher temperature. So we've done a lot of work to take it from -70 to -20. That's a long story in of itself, but success there from the team, and also move towards an ability to scale this up very quickly. So they're kind of happening in the background. They're probably not sort of noteworthy from shareholders' point of view, but it does just make us even more attractive as far as Big Pharma is concerned. So yeah, I think we just understand exactly all the boxes that have to be ticked by Big Pharma to get a deal done. And we're sort of slowly but surely making sure all those have a big tick in them.
Very good. Thanks for your time today, Malcolm, and for the presentation. And thanks to those in the audience who've joined.
Thanks very much, Matt. Great to be on your conference. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Next up, we have Heramed, and they'll be on in about 10 minutes from now. So look forward to some of you joining us there. Thank you.